lately it seems like everything that even starts out as a bland topic turns kind of volatile in our industry. So, certainly we could talk about a number of those items. I think that what you pulled up on the email, any one of those are great subjects to look at and have the potential for ramifications, both kind of known and unknown, coming into existence here in the not too distant future. That first one that was on the docket there was talking about the Amazon New York facility whose vote I believe just maybe a week ago or something like that.
Yes, since a week ago.
Decided to approve the capacity to unionize, right? I'm not even sure if it approved unionization or if it approved the ability to start looking into it. I'm not quite sure. What have you seen on that?
So it was the Staten Island facility, and actually it was running parallel with the same exact vote going down in Alabama.
George.
In opposition to the Staten Island one. That other one, actually, they did not pass. The unionization vote did not go through. So, but it is a pretty big deal in Staten Island because it was actually expected that they would not pass in that vote, that it would be in favor of Amazon instead of the unionization workers. So it's a pretty big deal. And Amazon is one of the largest companies in America, I think, or the largest. I would need to check that. Top two.
Top
two. Right. So, I mean, it's a very, very big deal. And just like another company that recently had a couple of locations unionized, which is Starbucks. I know that they had a location in Seattle, Seattle unionized just recently. So I do think that this might be a trend.
That jumped out at me when I first read that they were attempting to do this is that there's more going on than meets the eye, which is typically the case, as we spoke about a moment ago. But both these companies you just talked about, Starbucks and Amazon, are not exactly the low wage providers. They have
they're highest for the work they're asking.
And, typically that initial vote from the population of employees usually centers around the desire to get more in terms of salary or hourly wage. And in this case, there's something else going on that we need to apply our understanding to. And then if we can look at that, how does that roll out into the supply chain, the area of our expertise, and where does that line up with some of the way things are going? That's the question I have. And I don't have the answer to it, but I thought it would be a great topic of conversation amongst the four of us today for a few minutes.
I do think that, like I said a second ago, it's going to be sort of a wave of unionizations, at least in urban areas in the United States. Some of these facilities, I mean, there's Amazon fulfillment centers pretty much everywhere at this point, but I do think there's going to be a trend in that direction. And obviously the Biden administration has said time and time again, they're very pro-labor unions. So right now it's sort of, working in their favor if the political sphere is on their side. I also think this may rush Amazon into automation. They're already incorporating AI in some of their stuff. Warehouse AI is a huge thing right now in the industry. You can have someone operate a forklift from their house at this point. I don't know, will this speed up that process? I don't know if this will exactly bring up the wages as quickly as they want.
Yeah, let's go down that road a bit and talk about that, because I mean, just throwing this out there, anytime you have pressure on a company, there's pressures all over the place. We can talk about all kinds of different things going on with large and small businesses that from a governmental standpoint, from an employee standpoint, from a budgetary standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, that apply financial pressure on these companies. Well, there's two things that happen when that occurs. Either the price of whatever service or commodity or whatever manufactured goes up, and or the efficiencies necessary to accomplish those services or products has to become greater. And part of that efficiency is taking human employees out of the equation, as you just said. So this is going to drive some of the agenda. It's kind of a twofold regulatory environment. If those in power are pro-union, which is pro-person or pro-employee, then this looks very good from that aspect, from the political aspect. And at the same time, if the agenda is to drive automation, to drive what a lot of people in the industry are calling greenwashing, then you're accomplishing two things at the same time by applying these unionization proposals.
From firsthand experience, when Jessica used to work at Amazon, I don't think it's necessarily a pay gap, because actually, when it came to actual pay, Amazon paid $15-16 an hour, which is above and beyond what the everyone's standard is currently here, at least in California. So when Jessica went to work there, they were paying her $16 an hour. But I think the rub is with Amazon is they would hire in batches and waves of people coming. They're always hiring, right? So when Jessica got hired, her hours were like 7, 8, 9 o'clock till like 11, right? So 3-4 hours in the evening. Did that for 3 or 4 hours. They taught her how to seg and sort and all that fun stuff. She was enjoying it at the time, had good coworkers. Everyone was kind of happy. And then at about the 3 or 4 month mark, they started saying, hey, we're changing things up a bit. Now her hours went from like 7 to 11 or 6 to 11, like the was second shift, I guess, to third shift, which was like 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock in the morning till like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And she tried that for a little while. Time for it's like, okay, I've got school coming up, because they do a lot of hiring of students. And it goes like, I have class here at 8 o'clock, so I have to kind of be off work by that time. And sure enough, the management goes, well, then just take some PTO time off. And at that point, you're going to go, well, let's think about that, all right? So every 3 or 4 months, they shift their labor hourly requirements to to kind of push people out, because they know that they have another batch of people coming in.
Well, what they've really done, what they've really done, Nico, is they've changed the way they view or look for loopholes in whatever has been designed. So you roll forward and let's see this unionization. And of course, when a lot of people believe when one of the dominoes at Amazon falls, they'll all eventually fall. That's the kind of philosophy that people that want the unionization to occur would be looking for. But to your point, your daughter was working part-time and on a shift less desirable every single time. So what you'll do is the automation thing's a great point, but also part-time employment will be a point. And then on top of that, unions have a lot of rules around what type of employee you are. Full-time, part-time. If you're a student, you don't get the same ability to be to get particular types of overtime, things like that. So the companies are always, to my point a minute ago, the companies are always going to look, see what edges they can trim. To be even simpler, you have a product and a service and you're quoting it to the consumer at X, and you have competition quoting it here or here, right? Your goal is to make sure what you do collectively as a company allows you to get your product at a lower price or a better service to the consumer first before your competitors, period. End of story. That's competition, that's business. So everything else falls below that line. Employment prospects of all these people, whether they're part-time students or full-time 30-year employees, falls underneath that. And so the lower priority, no matter what we talk about in terms of politics.
Even the full-time employees were getting pushed into challenging out work hours. So if you were working first shift, second shift, that's something that your family depended on because you were full-time, Amazon started asking them to go, hey, we're going to move you over to, and it was like take it or leave it kind of situation policy, right? So, and typically the people that were there full-time, they've been there for 2 or 3 years, they started pushing those guys out, which leaves room for the part-times to go into full-time work. It's like, oh, look, there's a full-time position, but I have to work these hours. And the guys that have only been there 6 months, 12 months that want to make give Amazon a good shot, they're the ones willing to pick up the slack. It's like, oh, I'll work the graveyard shift. Right. And the next thing you know, there's this cycle, and we were starting to see, because Jessica was there just long enough to start seeing the cycle of new bodies that are like, oh man, I got into Amazon. I got the hours I wanted. They're happy. And then they get slightly pushed out. And then the guys that have been there 6 to 12 months get, oh, look, I got this opportunity to go full time and higher pay. And then they're moved into management. And then there's this cycle. And it's like, I see what you guys are doing. That's kind of cool but not cool at the same time.
Well, there's a psychology of that cycle as well, that the new employees coming in don't have the reference points in understanding of the old veterans, right? So they're not looking for something that the old veterans thought was standard. Their new standard is, worse hours, maybe good pay, certainly if especially if they're unionized, but their idea of what they're doing or what they're looking for has changed because of what is allowable now.
It's interesting you bring up the cycle, Nico, because the way I look at Amazon, and maybe I'm looking at it through a completely different lens, but somebody who's known people who work in upper management Amazon, and those who, like your daughter, who've also worked, just sort of a starting position at Amazon. The one thing I've seen, especially in these starting positions, is they have a very high turnover rate. And there are a lot of people I know who've worked at Amazon briefly and don't anymore because of whatever reason. But it reminds me of some of these Silicon Valley companies, XYZ, any name you want. Some of them you may not even know the names, but there's a lot of startups where they hire a lot of younger people who are usually either in college or right out of college. And they usually take very, very difficult hours, long hours in those circumstances, but maybe odd shifts, like you were saying, the 11 to 3 o'clock in the morning shift, because they're making money. They're finally making money instead of being a struggling student somewhere. And it's that same sort of thing. It's just cycling out people all the time, which is a huge argument a lot of people make why they don't like Amazon. I mean, people compare it all the time to the movie WALL-E, the Pixar movie WALL-E. Have you seen that movie? And they have, I don't remember the company's name, but they have this big company that has sort of taken over the planet before everyone fled on their spaceships. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 20 years, but maybe the Starlink is going to be, helping us keep our spaceships that Elon Musk made, and we're all going to be living up there cursing Amazon for destroying the planet. I don't know, but that is the sort of argument a lot of people make. And it reminds me of that sort of cycling through as many people as possible just to keep the product moving.
A lot of Amazon deliveries are done third-party logistics partners, so it's not like they're towing the line with treating drivers like fairly versus, companies that have been long established in the retail industries like the Targets and the Walmarts and the, and all the Costcos, where they actually, have traditional logistics requirements, right?
I mean, Walmart just, I think yesterday, announced that they're going to be offering up to $110K for a driver.
Yeah,
I know that CNBC actually just released, I think it was either a podcast or a short video where they were interviewing the FreightWaves CEO, and he was talking about how Walmart is sort of the Harvard of trucking. The bottom line is that a lot of people who are truck drivers are looking to smaller carriers right now because the issue isn't just pay. It's not just wanting a bigger paycheck. It's also the hours, the requirements, the compliance issues. And you have someone like Walmart or Amazon where, yeah, they're a big company and they have deep pockets, but they also have very, very, very strict guidelines to protect themselves for the most part, right?
The cycling that you referred to before is probably a very good strategy by Amazon to undercut unionization efforts anyway. Those type of people that move in and out real quickly aren't the type to unionize anyway. They're not there long enough. They're young. They got other things to do, right? But the irony about Walmart is it wasn't that long ago that they were referred to like Amazon is now. Very bad against workers. They were red state weirdos and they were very difficult to deal with. Now suddenly they're the media darling, at least from FreightWaves, Harvard of
the Harvard.
I mean, think about what
I've never thought of the word Harvard and Walmart in the same sentence before.
Yeah, it was an amazing thing. I saw the same video, but now it's just Amazon's turn. But I don't think that, just to take the completely opposite perspective, I don't see any chance that this moves out of in across the country in terms of unionization. I see this as specific to New York, specific to Staten Island. The guy who was basically behind it there, he didn't have the help of a larger national union. It was specific to that location. It's New York. And then you also said there was one Starbucks in Seattle. Well, those are classic places that you'd find that. Now, there's a reason Alabama didn't make it happen, right? And even on top of that, the vote was pretty close in the Staten Island. It
Very
was,
close.
yeah, it was very close. And lots of the people on the other side, which they don't get a lot of media attention, they just simply said, we don't want the union, you don't want to pay the dues. You know, is it starting to trend? I don't think so. Is it great for news media and their hopefulness that the unions will happen across the United States?
I think that's the piece that maybe you're not recognizing here, Mark, is I hear what you're saying, and things do start specific to kind of particular geographies or segments of our society that are more susceptible based on their predilections than others. And we've talked about this a million times in terms of California, and how I always like to say they're the tip of the spear on certain issues. And the reason they're called that is because the rest of the spear follows them. And this thing in New York that occurred, they weren't the first to do this. Bessemer, this is the second vote they've had at Bessemer, and in less than a year, I believe.
Yeah.
And both have failed, but not by hugely significant numbers. Now we're talking about Alabama here. We're not talking about New York. So, it'll be interesting to watch this happen, but there's a lot of things going on a state to state level. And I wish I had some notes from a previous podcast that we did a year ago on this subject. But there are different states like Arizona as one of them, where they're working to change the right to work state mandates, if you will. And the main reason to do something like that is to allow for, whether it's small or large companies, to do the very things we're talking about here. And I hate to put it this way, but, and Mark, you know better than anyone else on this podcast what we're talking about here, but everything has a layer of politics now. Everything. And I can't think of anything that doesn't have a leaning in one direction or a bias somehow or another, that somebody wants to put this veneer of politics across the top of it. And the unions in this country, whether it's private or public unions, are one of the primary responsible parties for funding huge election situations for particular candidates of their choice. And that's not going to change anytime soon. And it doesn't matter that 49.5% of the people at that New York facility voted against that union. The dues that they're going to have to pay now are going to go in a direction that the primary people in that union decide to have it go, period. So the consequences are much far reaching. And maybe you could speak to that a minute, and then we can dive into the kind of periphery consequences. I think that this kind of thing applies to the transportation industry as well, because I see, and I hate to say it, but these things get rolling downhill and they get a momentum of their own.
I mean, it's possible. I think Amazon is not going to let this sit. They're going to attack this legally, and they're going to make it really difficult for this to take off in any particular way. Secondly, unionization in the United States since the 50s has been going down every year. You hear a lot about it, but that doesn't mean the aggregate numbers reflect a surge in unionization at all. You see pockets, and you see it in particular industries. I mean, it isn't surprising at all it would be in Starbucks, given the type of clientele and the type of workers there. But you don't see it as much in your typical working class unionization kind of thought process that we've had in terms of unions before. And you're right, unions are more aligned with the Democratic Party, but not as strongly as they had been. Biden might be one of the last true Democrats who's kind of a union guy in terms of the tradition that you and I might remember. I mean, so it isn't as aligned as it was in the 50s. So that's the reason I said I don't see the larger context ripe for unionization. For one more obvious reasons is artificial intelligence, and there's now a substitute for labor. Furthermore, and even maybe a larger part, we have the Great Resignation. There's not people rushing back to the labor force. And as a result, companies are moving forward with less labor and figuring out how to do with less. Do you pay someone $20, $30 an hour plus all the benefits, or do you try to, like Jenny said, get a forklift you can drive from?
So you got to ask yourself the question: what is the unemployment rate today, and what is that a consequence of? Right, it's very, very small. It's 3 point something percent, right, which is kind of what it was at the beginning the first couple of years of Trump, maybe even better now. I don't even know. But there's these huge economic disruptions that are occurring right now, not just globally, but certainly in the United States for all kinds of reasons. So if there's this great resignation and there's more of a great realignment, then people are either fully employed now and making more money, which we can debate the value of that money with inflation, et cetera, or there's something else going on. And I'm not saying that everything is tucked into these things like the Amazon thing we're talking about, but I believe I've talked about it a lot. There's these regulatory agendas that occur, and these outside pressures that these companies are put under, and there's this kind of squeeze that's happening. There's a squeeze from the employment or effective employment side. Amazon's going to do what it can to fight those things in certain ways. But there's this other side, and I've talked about AB5 a million times, and I forget what's actually called now, that it was AB5 when it was being designated in California to disrupt the contractor value of the gig economy driver. That's the direction it was originally going into. But the ramifications of that, and it's now in many states, is that these people should be employees and not contractors. And that if you're a contractor, you're really an employee in disguise anyway. And so these large and small companies are having to redesign the way they look at their employment levels to determine whether somebody's truly a contractor, or how to set it up to make sure they're legally a contractor, or they just go to this W-2 formula. And as W-2 formulas come about more and more, guess what opens up? More labor unionization. And I'm not against unions at all. That's not the point of this. I think people should have the power to direct themselves in a group for their overall benefit. And there's always a balance there. But these kind of things keep coming up in my mind over and over. And I don't have an answer to it, but I see these things converging all the time.